Good morning, I'm Craig Cawrse, landscape architect out of Chagrin Falls, Ohio. And let me get this rolling. Pat, who's getting mic'd up right now, will be right after me to expand upon some of the things I'm talking about. But we are talking about stormwater management areas, filter beds, bio-cells, bio-swales, bioretention. I'm sure you've all heard of these terms. Really what we're doing is what I call LID, low impact development. And by development, that can be a subdivision, that can be an interstate, it can be a roadway, a parking lot. Just trying to expand the meaning of low impact development. We want to be part with the nature wherever we can, reasonably and financially reasonable. Bio-swales and filter strips. Filter strips can be just grass areas that the rainwater, stormwater flushes over. It slows the water. It allows some infiltration, cleansing, runoff on site. We're trying to keep a lot of this water contained on site. It can improve the aesthetics of a right-of-way, and it can reduce flooding off-site. And these are just some examples right here. This is I would call filter strips, and then we've got a gravel swale down here so the water is trapped and directed. And this is also a filter strip up here. One of the things, Bio-Swale, you may hear that term a lot and really maybe not quite familiar with it. It's very simple. We're taking the water, draining it into an area that has a special soil mix, which is a mix with sand and humus. We'll have a gravel, kind of a filter at the bottom, and sometimes we'll have even a bit of storm drainage. But the idea of this is to catch the water, allow some of it to infiltrate, slow it down. When I've even done them, we even put a check dam in, especially if you've got a slope along a highway. I've used it that way. This is a case study. We're currently working on West Broad Street down in Columbus near 270. This is 270 right here. If anybody's familiar with the casino, it's sitting right about here. So that was one of the things that spurred this on. We did 3.5 miles of streetscape design, and it seemed to pick up speed as soon as the governor came in and worked the deal out with the casinos on tax money. It's amazing how those things work, I think, nowadays. What we did on this one, you can see there's a series of 6 bio-swales here, and they are swales. What we have is a mall in this area, not very full, but parking lots that were draining towards Broad Street, this West Broad Street. And our idea was to catch this water, similar to what I just showed you before in a bio-swale. So we're after some water quality before it's released into the storm system. And it does help with interchange greening and also aesthetics and ecological function for the right-of-way. This is obviously the ramps and so forth to get in the area. So it offered us an opportunity to do something a little different. It is a township, and the township did take over the responsibility of maintaining these. But we also did, I'll say we used low maintenance plants, and I'll show you those in just a second. This is just a blow up of the area. Once again, just catching the water. You can see the cars here, but it was kind of a bad situation that was impacting the roadway, and we had to address that as we went along. And we've also worked in trees. We did our street trees, and what's interesting, what Bill just talked about, we've used the elms, we've used the, I'll say the lilac tree, we've used locusts, all very tough. They've done very well in this one area. This is the stretch that was completed about a little over a year ago, about 1.5 years ago. So within these swales, we try to address some aesthetics in addition to just having a function of water cleansing. The sedge that Bill just talked about, we also used iris, knowing that in the bottom areas they were going to get a little bit more water. And the black-eyed Susan were up on the edge in a little bit higher ground. You have had a little, I'll call it microclimates that relates to the water in a bioswale. And I had a kind of a bioretention basin at my office building, and I met with Bill, and we actually created humps in the bioretention area so we could put different types of plants. That's a little bit of, I'll call micro planting design, and it's come out very well. But the idea was to get some color in this, and this is, and I'm sure you all now are familiar with this, it's a complete street with the median in the middle here. And let me just jump back for a minute. We got the medians, we've got the bicycle path, and that was a big thing. It was, I think, one of the first complete streets in the Columbus area that I'm aware of. And picking plants also for the median became a challenge, and we had to actually use some of the plants that Bill's talked about. The salt, there's a tremendous amount of salt even in Columbus that they use. I also want to talk about when I say filter strips, they could be areas on the slopes. If we could, maybe mow less on some of these areas, we can come up with what I call no-mow seed mixes. This happened to be the office building I did, it's about 7 years ago now, and we used a no-mow seed mix, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. This is another no-mow seed mix. I'm always thinking of maintenance, and I know that's a big deal that ODOT has to tackle. So whatever is done planting-wise, when we do designs, whether it's for ODOT or one of our commercial clients like the Cleveland Clinic, we have to think about maintenance. We try to pick trees that'll attain the shape we want, particularly upright. The plantings we want, the clinic has gone to I'll say a low mowing grass seed mix. Not that it gets like this, but it still looks nice and is much more drought tolerant. No-mowed seed mixes, and you'll see down here, Ohio Prairie Nursery, they're in Hiram. I do a lot of, I'll say, using them as a consultant on seed mixes. I think they're very knowledgeable there, and I had them, help pick out some of these, which we have used. The fescues are particularly good as kind of a no-mow. A little bit of Kentucky blue, that's not one we use too much. It's not obviously as drought tolerant and so forth, but I think these mixes could be used more on some of the ODOT projects. Native seeds, you heard Bill touch on that a little bit, just some of the native plantings. The companion to that is some of the native seeds. I mean, maybe if you could envision, maybe some of the slopes on our interstates could be planted with a native seed that we could not have to really mow it. It still has to be maintained to a certain degree. But there are a number of these, oops, let me jump back here. A number of these are, you've got big blue stem. If you've ever seen that, it gets about this high. There's little blue stem. These are all some of the native plants we used to have in Ohio, some of the prairie grasses. I thought I'd just talk about rest stops. I mean, that's a common thing. It's not just highways, but this is a biocell we created at the Cleveland Clinic. It's, we use palm sedges, actually a sedge mix of 5 different sedges. It's been in about 6 years. The water from the parking lots, we put gaps in, we did stone around it, flows in. There's a soil mix of a couple feet thick that acts as a filter, and then there is some drainage. With this, I don't know whether you would get in this situation where by doing this, we did not have to put underground stormwater retention. So that was a break, and it added some aesthetics to the parking lot. But I think it could be something that could be done at some of our rest stop parking lots. Once again, just thinking of a rest stop parking lot. This is a Bio-Swale that I did at my office building. These are monitors. We have USGS has monitored this, our site for 6 years, mainly because right behind it, I've got 8,200 square feet of permeable pavers. We store the water under that. And then it comes out, monitors. So an inch of rain falls, 0.6 of an inch of rain comes out through evaporation, transpiration, infiltration, and just disappearing. USGS can't account for where all the water goes, and it's not leaking out anywhere. But the Bio-Swale, after a few years, begins to look like this. It can, the plant material can grow up. We used a lot of native plant materials. We worked with Bill Hendricks on this. And the Bio-Swale, these were some of the higher areas we did. It's really a bioretention area so that we could introduce some different sorts of plant material that weren't always underwater. This is a practical application. This is a 50-car parking lot at Ursuline College. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that, and they also, if you recall, had a tornado there a year and a half ago, and it tore up the stream. So this became part of the stream restoration. We had a SWIFT grant, and one of the things we did, and I'll show you the picture next, I just wanted to give you the parameters. We developed the Bio-Swale with the parking lot runoff coming into this. Then we had an outlet, and then we had to do some hardening of the stream edge here just because, as you can see, it picks up velocity before it straightens out. Here was the site before we did that, so just picture a rest stop. If you've got a situation where you've got to get into a stream, you can't impact that too much. This was the parking lot, the low spot with a catch basin here. The pipe was under. Sometimes it would overflow, as you can see right here. This is the basin. This is the lot. This is right where the basin was that I just showed you. And this is after the Bio-Swale was dug, and there is an outlet right there. Let me give you a little better picture here. This is it working. That's always the test on any of these Bio-Swales, Bio-Swales. There's always some non-believers, you know, is this thing really going to work? Is it going to catch the water? Is it going to be blown out? The answer is no. We've done these for about 8 years now. This was about a 2.5-inch rain in an hour, and it's handling that pretty well. This is coming through the cut in the curb. What was done is, I'll call it a little forebay was done with some of the gravel in the area, stone, heavy stone. Slows the velocity down. It allowed us to drop any of the particulates that were in the parking lot. And then these are our sedges in here. This is also monitored. A lot of these projects we do are monitored because it's still kind of a, not a cutting edge as it was before, but there's always searching for new information. These are the monitoring stations they had in here from a group out of North Carolina University. Greener medians, and Bill touched on that for a minute, but at some point, hopefully we could create some either Bio-Swales right down the middle. A lot of times I've seen it's just our drainage, your inlets, and then it's put into a stream immediately with all the salt and particulates that are collected. So, you know, maybe at some point we could get a little bit different thinking. I know engineering-wise, it's you got to watch the safety of the vehicular driver. So, but maybe if we have wide enough medians, we could do some of this in some key spots. I still think water quality is going to be an issue someday on these interstates. I think it's just waiting to happen. Everywhere else around, we have to meet EPA guidelines, and they're tougher every year. And somehow our highways have escaped. And then this is just a real wild kind of Bio-Swale median that really needs no maintenance. And maintenance is a thing. I always stress that in any designs we do. I think it's extremely important to think what is the size of plants, how often they're going to have to be cut, et cetera, et cetera. This was a little thing that Gary gave me, a way to get a tractor down into a bobcat accessible. This is really a kind of a concrete trough, but we have all the drainage from the filter strip going into this, and if it ever gets silt, you can just take that bobcat in there and get it out of there. So that's the kind of thinking we need maintenance-wise. Just in summary, Bio-Swales and Bio-Swales, reduce right-of-way maintenance costs. That would be the intent, to minimize some of the mowing. Preserve naturally vegetated areas and soil types within that, let's say, median areas. We want to direct runoff into or across vegetated areas. Once again, I think anything we can do to get salt to drop off, phosphorus to drop off. I'm not sure what all chemicals drop off the cars, off the brakes and things like that, but we want to treat pollutant loads where they are generated. In other words, let's try to confine this to, I'll say, the right-of-way of the highway. And that's where I say work with conjunction, of the landscape, add aesthetics and ecological value. And then this is, once again, the low-impact design. And there is a manual, low-impact development design for highway runoff done by University of Florida and Oregon State University. So that's my talk. And Pat's going to talk now. All right.
Thank you, Craig. I'm going to run quickly through 4 different projects we've done that are kind of specific sites, but they all relate to the transportation system and overall watershed issues. There was a wetland preserve from an urban area of City of Lima that we did on the Lima Central Catholic High School campus, and then the St. Rita's Medical Center of Tomorrow expansion. University of Northwestern Ohio has gone through a tremendous amount of expansion, and then the Muirfield Village, which is kind of one of the first new town developments north of Dublin. Okay, there we go. The question that was kind of put to me at one of the previous districts, so we tried to answer, and I think my examples will go through some of those solutions, but the real ongoing maintenance issue of the ditches along the roadside and the accumulation of sediment and invasive plant material. And kind of the principle I'd like to illustrate in our different projects that I'll be showing is really the solution is through the modification of the just the profile of the ditches is a big starting point to make them all so they're much more maintainable. The easiest way to control invasive plants is, number one, is to eliminate that top 6 inches of saturated soil, and then to allow easy maintenance for the very easy, quick, once a month or quarterly mowing. Okay. Oops. So the first project I mentioned was a wetland preserve we did that gathered storm drainage from 200 acres of the City of Lima, where in previous decades the city had dug a drainage ditch around the perimeter, kind of interconnected a couple of natural watersheds and shortcut the water to one culvert under a railroad, which led to a lot of stagnant water situations. What we did was open that up into meandering waterways and associated floodplains so that the natural vegetation, the soil profile could absorb that water, hold it on site, and treat it before it went out under the railroad and into the watershed. And these are just a few examples of the finished product after a couple of years, of just the natural grass mixes. The key to maintaining this, though, is to at least once a year be able to mow most of the areas, because a lot of the invasive plants and the undesirable trees just need to be knocked down once a year, and that really keeps them under control. Otherwise, almost any site in Ohio, particularly along the transportation system in these days, will be Phragmites and cattails and tree of heaven if you can't control it. And mowing is still the fastest and best way. So the profile is the key to that. This is on the LCC wetland project. This shows the 200-acre watershed and how all that funneled to a little pipe underneath the railroad that was put in the early 1900s that fed into a very picturesque lake and then on down to the Ottawa River. Well, of course, there was a tremendous amount of sediment that was coming through that site. And originally, a contractor had purchased this 43 acres and used it as both a place to steal topsoil and to dump any crap that was left over when he was done with a demolition project. And so our project incorporated burying or removing that material. This is the ditch that the city had dug in, I believe, 1980. Very narrow, steep-sided, and in some cases, the bottom of the ditch was actually lower than the outlet that it was going to, leading to these stagnation issues. And of course, the cottonwoods and the tree of heaven that invaded and became pretty much impassable. And there's the cattails taking hold in the side. This is a point where the storm drain for an adjacent street was actually lower than the center line of the ditch. So it was a terrible stagnant situation. And this is an area where the contractor had stripped all the topsoil because he needed it for another job site. And this is almost 20 years after he'd stripped the topsoil. He has, some thistles is about the only thing that grew on that site. So what we did was take the very narrow ditch and excavate out and create a large associated floodplain down more in the profile of the ditch. And we do have an underdrain under portions of it so that that segment does not remain saturated at the surface. Again, this is where there was a man-made ditch that connected just straight around the side. There's also a concrete plant that flowed through an old field tile that was plugged up. And we were able to create a very natural meandering water, a wetland area to absorb all that industrial water. And then this is the general city water that was collected through that swale. It's the project about a year after construction. This is the process of excavating out that ditch and creating the associated waterway. And we used emergent wetland plants in the bottom and, of course, the jute matting and check dams that were intended to be temporary, but it turned out that they were really a good solution to create that varying of wet conditions so that the different emergent plants would still survive. This is the secondary forebay after the actual detention basin. And these were some old concrete barriers that the contractor left on the site from a construction project. And we use those as kind of a check dam weir restrictor so that secondary forebay would detain water a little bit longer before it went into the stream. There was a small amount of water that we were actually able to kind of trickle through the site right after we seeded. So the emergent plants in the lower grasses began taking hold almost immediately. And it was, seeding was finished in September, and then early December we had our first real flood, and shows how rather than that trapped debris-filled ditch, we have a nice wide infiltration basin. And this is a project out a couple years later. And I think all the specific plants have been mentioned, so I'm going to just fly through that stuff so I stay on time with my examples. The St. Rita's Medical Center of tomorrow, we used a unique approach in that part of the state where every bit of roof water and parking lot pavement water actually runs through a stormwater management swale. The north half of the site was able to be collected in swales that did have to go into eventually the storm sewer system. But from the high point through the site, we were able to collect the majority of the water into a series of both attractive water features as well as a stormwater retention facility. It's a view from about the 5th floor of the hospital showing the different swales where the parking lot is broken up in every other bay. And then that water collects in the central median and runs on down to the lakes that are on the low side. In every part of the circulation in the parking lots, as a green space related to it with swales and infiltration areas every step of the way. So we kind of feel that by the time the water gets to a swale or a detention basin, you've already missed 90% of the opportunity to naturally recirculate that water. So here's the Bio-Swales, and it's probably really more correct to just call them stormwater infiltration swales. Of course, with a hospital, kind of the manicured look is pretty important, so we have to kind of restrain ourselves on some of the natural vegetation. So this might be a little bit more acceptable in some of the urban highway right-of-way solutions to have in some of the grasses and perennials that Bill and Craig talked about. And this is the final lake then where the water is collected. And actually, during higher rain periods, water is drawn off of this to do some of the irrigation on the lawn so that we're minimizing the use of the domestic water. And they also put in a well to do the rest of the irrigation, but the water in that area in Lime has enough sulfur to it that became a little less desirable around the hospital, so they had to switch over to where they do use some city water for irrigating up around the buildings. in infiltration areas that kind of subtly fit into the site wherever possible. And then the majority of the new roof is a roof garden where we have the stormwater storage cells and varying heights for plant material. And the upper 7 floors of the hospital look down on that 3rd-story roof garden. The next example is University of Northwestern Ohio, which is expanded to about 63 acres of property over the last 10 years. That was a lot of somewhat abandoned farm field because there are enough drainage issues. And there's a very stressed waterway on the southern edge that experienced a lot of flooding over the years. So our design incorporated every bit of the stormwater running into, again, being run through swales and collecting into temporary infiltration basins that all feeds in a series of steps down to the floodplain that then holds it. In most cases, the stormwater actually is detained in 5 or 6 times before it gets into the stream, so that the normal flow from the city is already gone in that waterway before the campus water gets to it. Especially larger parking lots, we have the infiltration swales that with the perforated tile underneath. This is a kind of a simplified version. The budget wasn't there to do a lot of the soil profile, so it really is just the typical Northwest Ohio soils. But we do have an underdrain in the center so that we don't have that saturated situation in the middle. This is a fairly shallow one that joins both the perimeter arterial stormwater as well as the on-site parking lot water, where we run a shallow tile through the bottom of the swale and use a finer gravel so that actually the grass will grow across that. And after about 3 years, you don't even see that swale and you can just mow right across it. And this was a 350 car parking lot that the water is collected actually in 3 different swales as it steps down the hillside to this final strip before it then is released into one of the larger infiltration basins. And this is right after one of the storm events. This area is where the next phase of dorms is still being constructed. So this detention area was actually expanded on around, but the water drains out of that within about a day of the rain and moves on down to the floodplain where it sits there for maybe an additional day before it filters into the stream. So this is the final step of the water from the 63-acre campus. And I think, to me, the most exciting project is Muirfield Village, which is a 3,200-acre kind of new town development north of Dublin. And our firm was involved in the very initial stages of planning through construction of many of the first, I think we were on phase 18 was the last one I did the construction drawings for. The first step for us was to do a thorough inventory of the site, looking at both the plant life inventory, the soils, slopes, but probably the most critical step was the hydrology analysis, where we identified the watersheds, the collection points, the ravines, and opportunities for stormwater infiltration and or permanent bodies of water. The initial concept plan, we wanted to create a very scenic, passive, calm community for both commercial and residential and school sites, and of course recreation, with the Jack Nicklaus's Memorial Golf Course being the kind of the focal point of it. So working with Jack Nicklaus's group, we defined, again, looking at all those waterways, and developed a roadway system that meandered through the site, and we established a series of parkways for the major collectors, and then the minor collector streets, and then the subdivision streets and the individual courtyards. Again, incorporating passive water management swales in every foot of the roadways. It is kind of the final land use distribution plan showing the denser development on the higher level ground and the more sensitive, the lower density as you're moving down in towards the natural waterway systems. But again, stormwater management and use of the land with minimal disturbance were really the guiding points. It wasn't just a landscape architect drawing pretty curvy lines. It really was designed to fit with the site. And then this is the final development plan showing the configuration of the different densities along the main collector. And as you get further into the minor collectors and residential streets, you get into the less dense development. This is a bird's eye view then of Muirfield Boulevard as it meanders through as the main collector. And this is a nice close-up shot showing those very subtle swales on the side of the roadway. Essentially, curbs were not allowed in Muirfield Village. Everything had to sheet subtly off the road as it does on Interstate Highway and into these swales that then collect at the identified low points. Both streams and even the walkway system pass underneath those major collectors. In the next shots are just going to be a few aerial views of showing just how integral water, green space, and the housing development is with the layout of the roadway system, so that at every point you have water running off the roads into a grassy swale, collecting into ravines that runs eventually to either a permanent or water body or a temporary detention basin. Again, showing the hierarchy of the streets. As the street gets narrower, of course, the related green space can get narrower, just kind of all designed to handle that volume of runoff. All the way down to the individual subdivision streets where every bit of this street system and the lots drain into this lake, which has then an outlet that goes to the major stream. So it doesn't matter whether they're small patio homes or commercial developments, or in this case, the large 5-acre estate lots. The same principles are where water runs off of the hard surfaces, it collects, makes contact with as much green space as possible before it then gets into the waterways that join down to the streams or lakes. And wherever we could incorporate green space for both the human enjoyment and contact, as well as for stormwater management. And this is a green space for the neighborhood, but it's also an infiltration area for the stormwater. And of course, the golf course itself.